Remember the Calgary Tigers? I gotta ask the question, even though I'm gonna say most people are gonna probably say no, as we're gonna talk about a team that was around in Calgary sports over 100 years ago. So much of this history not only predates me, but even my late grandparents and my one grandmother that's still around here would either not remember because it predates them, or they were too young to even remember the Calgary Tigers here. But as I always do in my Remember the Calgary Series here, let's take a look at the funk sports teams from the past year. And this one definitely going way back here, as we definitely know of the existence here, and the fact that in 2011, when the Calgary Flames had their Heritage Classic, where they played the outdoor game at McMahon Stadium, against the Montreal Canadiens, that the jerseys that they wore in that particular game paid homage to the Calgary Tigers here. And the Calgary Tigers, you could say, was the first professional hockey team to represent Calgary. As you know, if you go back to episode 3, I talked about the Calgary Cowboys, and of course the Calgary Flames are now the professional hockey team today here. So this is what I'll talk about in this episode. I mostly will be talking about the Calgary Tigers Hockey Club, but there's also a rugby team too that I'll put in the second part of this video here. Won't be as much information on that, but the Calgary Tigers Rugby also, you could say, planted the seed for a professional football team that Calgary has right now in the Calgary Stampeders series. So it's definitely interesting that the Calgary Tigers, you could say, planted the seed for eventually to have Calgary Flames and the Calgary Stampeders here. So if you also want to see my last episode in this series here, in episode 4 here, I talked about the Calgary 88s, the basketball team here. But here we are now talking about the Calgary Tigers here, and it's going to be interesting how I'm going to go through this episode here, because once again we're looking at a team that's is over 100 years ago. Gives you definitely an idea of what the time was like then. It was definitely a different time here. The hockey definitely is a lot more developed now here, and also the fact that this Calgary-based team also did compete for the Stanley Cup, finally against the Montreal Canadiens as well here. But the Calgary Tigers Hockey Club definitely has played in a few different leagues, and there was 2 different renditions of it when I go through my notes here. And of course, I just go through the standard sites, the Hockey DB and Wikipedia here, to also find some of these relics to share here. And I have all my links in the description for where you can find it. So let's talk about the Calgary Tigers here, Hockey Club here, as the Calgary Tigers were often nicknamed the Bengals, one another cat-like animal here. They were an ice hockey team based in Calgary, Alberta, from 1920 till 1927 here. So this first version of the Calgary Tigers was played professional hockey in the 1920s here, and they were members of, there was several leagues that they played out of here. There was the Big Four League, and then there was the Western Canada Hockey League and the Prairie Hockey League, all from 1920 to 1927 here. Then the Tigers were revived in 1932, playing for a short-lived 4 seasons in the Northwestern Hockey League, and they played their games in the Victoria Arena, which you could say was the first major hockey arena that the city of Calgary had, which is now part of Stampede Park here. As you know, you had the Victoria Arena here, and then you got the Stampede Corral, which was kind of the building to replace the Victoria Arena here. And actually, as of this recording in the series here, the Stampede Corral is going to be starting demolition for the expansion of the new BMO Center expansion there. And then, of course, they got the Scotiabank Saddledome, which is the main building arena for the Calgary Flames and other events here. However, we know in the next couple of years there'll be the new event center for the Calgary Flames, and long-term plans is that eventually the Saddledome will be torn down here. So definitely, sign of the times here. So yeah, let's just look at some of these leagues here. I mean, the Big Four League definitely was a top senior ice hockey league to operate in Calgary and Edmonton for 2 seasons in 1919 and 1921 here. And also it was the creation of the Allen Cup, which is another championship cup that is awarded for senior hockey amateur league here. And then the teams that were in this league here, well, actually there was the Calgary Tigers actually won one championship as well. There was a hockey team called the Edmonton Eskimos here, so there was an Edmonton Eskimos hockey team here. And then I'm just trying to find some other teams here. I guess I can't really find much on teams here, but this is all finding history back in the 1920s here. But they were in the Big Four League for one season here. As I mentioned, in the 1920-21 season, they played 15 games. They were 10-4-1 here, and they finished first, and they won the Intercity Championship here. And then the next season here, that's when they moved into the Western Canada Hockey League here. So in 1921, they became the first major professional team in Calgary in 1921 here, after they were in the Big Four League. And I mentioned here in 1924, which you could say is the finest season the Tigers had, after winning both the league and the Western Canadian Championships here. The Tigers were the first Calgary-based team to compete for the Stanley Cup here. Although, unfortunately, the Calgary Flames lost, or the Calgary Tigers in this case here, lost to the Montreal Canadiens in 2 games here. And we'll look more in depth in the 1924 Stanley Cup Finals here, as Montreal Canadiens the Calgary Tigers was the first team that actually the Montreal Canadiens played and beat Calgary in the Stanley Cup Finals here. As you call it, 1986, the Calgary Flames and the Montreal Canadiens played each other for the Stanley Cup, and then the Montreal Canadiens won in 1986, and then the Calgary Flames got their revenge in 1989 here. So definitely some interesting history that 2 of the 24 championships that the Montreal Canadiens have came against the team in Calgary here. And keep in mind, back in 1924 here, the Stanley Cup used to be, awarded for the best team in Canada here on an amateur level here. It's because you had other champions of the league that competed for the Stanley Cup here. So that's how the Calgary Tigers and the Montreal Canadiens met for the Stanley Cup here, because you had the Western Canadian Hockey League champion taking on the National Hockey League champion here. And definitely, when I look back, it was a lopsided series that the Montreal Canadiens definitely had no problem beating the Calgary Tigers here. And they also had a famous goalie that I'll mention. Then, as I say, a couple years later, the Stanley Cup in 1926, the National Hockey League took control over it. And now it's primarily, the championship trophy for the National Hockey League here. So that's definitely some early history here. And then continuing on here is after succumbing to financial pressures in 1927, that's when the Tigers ceased operations here. But then they were briefly revived in the mid-1930s as a minor professional club here. So definitely the Calgary Tigers, they pretty much covered all levels of professional hockey and semi-professional hockey here. And then the Tigers competed for a total of 11 seasons in 4 different leagues, winning 4 championships during their existence. And then there was 5 players that played for the Calgary Tigers that you actually find them in the Hockey Hall of Fame here. And I know one of the links that I got, I'm not too sure if there was server issues today, but there's this couldn't come up as of this recording here, so I'll have to go by the Wikipedia here. So as I say, let's go back to the other series here. So other seasons here, 1920-21 here, or 21-22 here, when they went to the Western Canadian Hockey League here. They were 14-10 in 24 games that season. They were second in that league here, but they lost the semifinals here. And then 1922-23 here, in the 30-game season, they were 12-18 and finished third, and didn't even make the playoffs here. And then in 1923-24 year, the year that they got to compete for the Stanley Cup here, in 30 games, they were 18-11-1 here. They finished first in the league. Won the league championship here, but then lost to the Montreal Canadiens in the Stanley Cup Finals here. In 1924-25 here, in 28 games, they were 17-11 here. They finished first, and then in that league, they finished first overall, and they got to the league final, but then they lost to Victoria that year. And then in 1925-26 here, in 30 games, they were 10-17-3 here. They were 5th in the league and did not make the playoffs here. And then the last season, this was now in the Prairie Hockey League. In 32 games, they were 22-9-1 here, as they finished first overall, and then they won the league championship then. But by then, the Stanley Cup took over control for the National Hockey League to be the championship trophy for the NHL here. So the Calgary Tigers in 1927 weren't able to compete for the Stanley Cup then. And then when they got revived here in the 30s here in the Northwest Hockey League here, they were 1932, 1933 here. They were 30 games. They were 16-10-4 here. Finished first in the league, and they lost the final that year. 1933-34 here in 34 games. They were 17-11-6 here. They finished first in the league, and they won the championship in the Northwest Hockey League here. And then 1934-35 here, in 26 games, they had a bad season. They were 3-15-8 here. Finished fifth and did not make the playoffs here. And then 35-36 here, they had a 40-game season. They were 15-21-4 here. Finished fifth and did not make the playoffs here. So once they got revived in the semi-professional league in the Northwest Hockey League, keep in mind 32-33, they were in the Western Canadian Hockey League here. They had some moderate success, but the last two seasons they did not see as much success here. But they still won 4 championships in 11 seasons of an existence here, including playing for the Stanley Cup here. So if you take a look at the 1924 Stanley Cup Finals here, where we took on the Montreal Canadiens here, as I mentioned here, the 1924 Stanley Cup Finals here saw the National Hockey League champion, which was the Montreal Canadiens, defeat the Western Canadian Hockey League champion Calgary Tigers 2-0 in the best of 3. So it was a best of 3 series there. It was Montreal's 4th appearance in the final and their 2nd championship overall here. And actually you could see 2 different sources here that the Montreal Canadiens, they have won 24 Stanley Cups, so 23 of them came in as the NHL here. So this was actually their first NHL championship here, depending on how you look at it here. But in Game 1, it was Montreal beating Calgary 6-1, and then in Game 2 it was closer, but Montreal shut out Calgary 3-0 here. So we were outscored 9-1 in the 2 games here. And I mean the locations of these games that were played. Well, it was played. Game 1 was actually played in the Mount Royal Arena in Montreal, and then in Game 2 was played at the Ottawa Auditorium in Ottawa here. And at the time when we were coached by Eddie Oatman, who was the coach of the Calgary Tigers, it was Leo Dannerod, who was the head coach of the Montreal Canadiens here. And then looking at who was in net, who happened to be in net for the Montreal Canadiens that year, Georges Vezina. Yes, that Vezina, the same goalie that is named the trophy after him for top goalie here. So definitely I got the summary here. You can look it up online here, but you could say that's still the finest season here. And then keep in mind that it was taking place at the late March here, because it happened during March 22nd and 25th here, so shorter hockey here. So usually the season is still going on here that when the Stanley Cup used to be awarded here. So and it was Harley Moran's who got the series-winning goal for the Montreal Canadiens at 4:55 of the first period here. So like I say, it was another fact that they can also throw in here is that this was last to file until 1983 when the Edmonton Oilers took on the New York Islanders, and the New York Islanders won their 4th straight Stanley Cup. That an Alberta team would have played for the Stanley Cup here. And as I also mentioned, the Montreal Canadiens did play the Calgary Flames in 1986 in the Stanley Cup Finals here. So definitely interesting that Calgary lost to Montreal twice in the Stanley Cup, in both in history and in more recent times here. I mean, the other head coach here, well, there's one guy, a couple other coaches that they list here that the Calgary Tigers had, was we had a Barney Stanley in 1921-22 here. And then even has Herb Gardner from 20 to 26 here, but that's what they list on the Wikipedia page here. But it definitely seems to be all, looking at history from over 100 years ago, it's kind of all over the place here. So if we go into Hockey DB here, we'll take a look at who led the team in scoring here. They don't have anything for the first season there, but in 21 and 22 here, Calgary was led by Barney Stanley, who actually is one of the players that's in the Hockey Hall of Fame here in 24 games here. He has 26 goals and 5 assists for 31 points here. I know that back then there wasn't 2 assists on goals here. And then another player that also is in the Hall of Fame is Merv Red Dutton, who was the defenseman here in 22 games. He had 16 goals and 5 assists for 21 points here, and that was the 22 season here. And then the 23 season here, who led the team in scoring, well, there was a Harry Oliver, who in 29 games, he scored 25 goals, 8 assists for 33 points here. A couple goalies we got, well, there was a Bill Penny who played most of the games. He was 37 and 11 here, so you can look on the Hockey DB for all the seasons that the Calgary Tigers have. It's broken down in different leagues here, so yeah, Harry Oliver was the leading scorer in 1924. In 27 games, he has 22 goals and 12 assists for 34 points here. So yeah, we'll keep it at that. So that's the Calgary Tigers from the Hockey DB here. So if you're going back to the Hockey Hall of Fame here, Hockey Hall of Famers are on. That's in the Hall of Fame for the Calgary Tigers here. Well, Barney Stanley, it says he was a former PCHA Spartan star who spent 2 seasons with the Tigers from 1920-22, joining the Tigers in the last season of the Big Four League, and once again turned pro when the Tigers joined the Western Canadian Hockey League here. He led the Tigers in scoring with 26 goals in 21-22 here, before being traded to the Regina Capitals here. And then you got another player, I mentioned Red Dutton here, a World War I veteran, who refused doctor's orders to have his leg amputated after suffering a shrapnel wound. Played 123 games with the Tigers before moving on to the NHL, where he played 419 games with the Montreal Maroons and the New York Americans. And then there was a Rusty Crawford, who also is in the Hall of Fame here, former standout of the National Hockey Association and the National Hockey League for the war here. He spent 3 seasons with the Tigers from 1922 to 25 here, and he recorded 19 goals in 64 games with the Tigers here. And then you have Herb Gardner. He began his professional career in Calgary in 1920 and remained with the Tigers until he was sold to the Montreal Canadiens in 1926 here, where he went on to win the Hart Memorial Trophy as the MVP in 1927 here. And then you got Harry Oliver, who began his pro career in Calgary playing with the Tigers from 1921 to 26 here, where he scored 90 goals before he was sold to the Boston Bruins here. And then Oliver would go on to play 11 seasons in the NHL with the Bruins and the New York Americans here. Keep in mind that in the NHL, in the early days, they had the Rangers, obviously, which is still around, and then there was the New York Americans in, which they were kind of way distance from the New York Rangers here. So those are the Hall of Famers that played time with the Calgary Tigers that made them spend some time with the NHL here. So, and I said, obviously, the legacy of the Calgary Tigers here is that in 2011, for the Heritage Classic here, the Calgary Flames wore jerseys that similarly looked like the Calgary Tigers with the way the stripe was, where they still had the the flaming C there. And I do have a couple of Heritage Classic jerseys here, but they're too small there. I bought them just as a collector to have it in my closet there. But that's just one legacy, how we paid homage to the Calgary Tigers here. And yeah, I guess it was also fitting that we played the Montreal Canadiens in the Heritage Classics here, because Calgary and Montreal definitely have some history here, including being a part in 3 Stanley Cup Finals when you count the Tigers, and then the 2 times that the Calgary Flames and Montreal Canadiens played each other in the Stanley Cup Finals here. And then the last part before we'll look at the rugby team here, I found this article here which brings up on Flames Nation here, which throws back to that series, where it says Throwback Thursday. This week in 1924 here, the Calgary Tigers fell to the Montreal Canadiens in the Stanley Cup Final. And I show clippings of the articles where it talks about that series where we lost to the Montreal Canadiens here. And once again, it just talks about the Tigers played out of Calgary between 1920 and 1927. And later again, between 1932 and 36 here, these 24 Tigers have won both the League and the Western Canadian Championship here. This is back when the Stanley Cup was the Challenge Cup for the Dominion of Canada, it's called. That's what it says on the top bowl here. And it says at the time, teams across 3 leagues would compete for the Cup, and believe it or not, the Canadiens in 1924 were the first club to have their names engraved on the Cup there. So that's where I mentioned where you can dispute how many Stanley Cups the Montreal Canadiens won. Was it 23 or 24 here? They say that this is their second championship, but first, as an NHL team here. Tigers of 24 finished at the Western Canadian Hockey League at the season top of the league with an 18-11-1 record. 1 point higher than the Regina Capitals here, who the Tigers beat in the league championship here. Leading the Tigers was Harry Oliver, who scored 22 goals and 34 points in 27 games here. As having beaten the aforementioned Capitals, the Tigers then took on the Pacific Coast Hockey Association champion, the Vancouver Maroons here. So they had to beat another team to get to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2-1 in the best of 3 there. But those Tigers were no match to the Canadiens, as Georges Vezina was in net for the Montreal Canadiens, who only allowed 1 goal in the 2-game sweep there that finished on March 25th, 1924 here. So that all shows some historical pictures in this article here. So, Georges Vezina, it's the same goalie that that has the trophy named after him. So, I just say all these websites here that I'll put in the description here. That's where you can find some of these relics and more information on, more in depth on each of these seasons here. I mean, I'm not going to go over absolutely every detail here, but it's definitely interesting to take a look at the Calgary Tigers here and think of the legacy that the Calgary Tigers have started to have hockey in Calgary here. And I just think, considering that we officially have had 3 professional hockey teams that represent Calgary here. We didn't have anything from the 1920s till 1970s here when we had the Tigers here, and then the Calgary Cowboys came in the World Hockey Association in 1975 here. And actually, if you look back on my Cowboys episode here, the Calgary actually was granted the team when the World Hockey Association started with the Calgary Broncos. But the owner died, and eventually that team moved on to Cleveland there. So you can see that video there, and then also the fact that eventually, when he brought the Atlanta Flames moved to Calgary here, we've been taking care of the Calgary Flames for 40 seasons here. So that's just definitely some interesting history here. I just found, putting my notes together here for this being a team that obviously I don't remember because it was way, way before my time here. And then when you're just trying to find information to piece together to find some relics to share on this video here, it just definitely gets a lot trickier, especially when it's a game at a different time there. But this is the hockey team here. So I'm going to go take a little break here and I'll come back. We'll talk about the rugby team, which I don't have as much information on, but I definitely found one website where I could share some pictures here with the Calgary Tigers rugby team in action here. And actually, the fun part of remembering finding these teams here is that you learn about another team while you're doing some research here. And there's another rugby team that's based out of Calgary that wouldn't be enough for me to make a full video on, but I'll bring them up when I talk about the rugby team. So actually it will change, and because I'm going to say the Calgary Tigers hockey team planted the seed for eventually the Calgary Flames, but now we'll take a look at the Calgary Tigers rugby team, and I'm going to say, given how the rugby evolved into the Canadian game that we have today here, you could say they planted the seed for the Calgary Stampeders. So I'll be back with my talking about the rugby team before I wrap things up and tee up the next episode here. So I'll come back shortly here. Well, I'm back now in my Stampeders gear here, because now we'll shift our focus from the Calgary Tigers that were on the ice to now let's talk about them on the field here, as I didn't find as much information on the Tigers rugby team in terms of who was on the team, but I did still find some interesting sights here. And as I say, the Calgary Tigers rugby team, or in the Wikipedia calls it Foot-Ball Club here. As you know, the Canadian game evolved from rugby here. And I'm going to say the Calgary Tigers rugby team eventually planted the seed for the Calgary Stampeders here. And actually, the Calgary Tigers evolved from many teams that eventually we led to the Calgary Stampeders here. As now we'll talk about the Calgary Rugby Football Club here. Was an early football club formed in Calgary, Alberta in October 1907 here. So this is just before the hockey club here. Today's Calgary Stampeders is what I'm decked out here for this part of the video here of the Canadian Football League, directly traced their lineage to this club here. And then I mentioned here, Calgary Rugby Football Club eventually was renamed the Calgary Tigers in 1908 and joined the Alberta Rugby Football Union that same year, along with the Caledonia and the Hillhurst football clubs here, which is one of the older communities in Calgary here. It later joined the newly formed Western Canada Rugby Football Union in 1911 here, and won its first ever Western Championship that year. The team would have been renamed several names over the next few decades here. So the first, you got the Calgary Tigers. They were the Tigers from 1902 to 1922 here. And then they were called the Tigers in 1925, and then in 1928 to 30 here. But in 1923-24 here, they were also called the 50th Battalion here. And then in 1931, they were called the Calgary Altomah-Tigers here. And then in 1932 to 34 here, I guess you could say the end of this franchise was the Calgary Altomahs from 1932 to 34 here. And then one team that I'll talk more in depth later in the series here, we had the Calgary Bronx from 1935 to 1941 here, and then eventually the Calgary Stampeders in 1945 to present here for 75 years here. So you could trace, interesting, both the Tigers, you can say indirectly, I would say for hockey, eventually cemented some legacy to eventually have the Cowboys and Flames here. And as I mentioned in the 2011 Heritage Classic, the Calgary Flames paid homage to the Calgary Tigers with their special jerseys here. But given that the Canadian game evolved from rugby here, I'm going to say the Calgary Tigers Football Club, or the rugby club here, definitely had even more of an impact, or a little more direct, with eventually when we had the Bronx and the Stampeders here. So looking at the Alberta Rugby Union here, that was formed in 1908 here. It was also formed the Alberta Rugby Football Union. So this is the Calgary Rugby Football Union in 1908. The Alberta Union was formed in 1911, and it was joined by the Manitoba Football Union and the Saskatchewan Rugby Union to form the Western Canadian Rugby Union in 1911. And in 1926, British Columbia also joined it to form the Western Canadian Rugby Football Union here. And then with the formation of the Western Canadian Football Union, the ARFU champion would compete in the playoff win with the winners of the Western Canadian Unions to determine the champion here. And then this is after reaching an agreement with the Eastern Canadian-based Canadian Rugby Union in 1921, the Western Canadian Rugby Football Union was able to compete for the Grey Cup champion game. So there's a little bit of a history with the Grey Cup as well here. Interestingly, with the Calgary Tigers and those leagues that they played in, had the Stanley Cup here before the Stanley Cup was controlled by the NHL here for their champion year. That year, the ARFU champion, the Edmonton Eskimos, which is no relation to the modern team, which is now called the Football Club here, won the championship and became the first ever team to compete for the Grey Cup here. So that's all the way back in the 1921 here. So if you look at the Alberta Rugby Football Champions here, well, you got the first club here that Calgary won was in 1908. It was the Calgary Rugby Football Union, the Calgary YMC Football Club here. And then in 1909, you had the Calgary Rugby Football Club, the Calgary Tigers. And then in 1910, they also won it. And then the start of the Alberta Rugby Football Union Tigers in 1911 there. The Calgary Tigers won it in 1912, 1913 here. No games happened in 1914 here. And then the one team we'll talk about a little bit here is that there was a football rugby team called the Calgary Canucks that only existed for a couple years. I didn't know about this team, but I wouldn't have found even any information on the Calgary Canucks rugby team back in 1913 to 1915 year that wanted to make a separate episode in this series here, but I'll sneak it in here. And then from 1916 to 1918, the season was suspended due to the First World War here. And actually the Calgary Canucks also won it in 1919, so there was another team. And the Canucks won it then. And then in 1920, you had the Tigers won it. And then actually there was the Edmonton Eskimos, not related to the football team. But in 1922, there actually was a team called the Edmonton Elks. Could that potentially be a team that, a name that the Edmonton Football Club could go with here? And then in 1924, you had the 50th Battalion won the championship here. And then the 1929, you had the Altomah-Tigers, and then 30, you have the Tigers. 31, you have the Altomah-Tigers, and then you have 32, 33 Altomahs, and then eventually, in a couple of years, you have the University of Alberta Golden Bears won it in between there. But then now in 35, you had the Bronx, and then 36, we'll talk about the Bronx Colts here, but we'll talk about the Bronx in a separate episode here, later in the series here. And then the Stamp story here, if you actually go on the Stampeders website here, the beginning here, in 1909, football in Calgary dates back in 1909 with the emergence of the Calgary Tigers in the newly formed Alberta Rugby Union. And then the Tigers were a dominant force in professional football as they captured the Western Canadian crown in 1911 here. 1915, it mentions the Tigers gave way to a new team in Calgary, the Canucks, that only played until 1919 because of World War I. An official league was never formed here. And then in 1923, football returned to Calgary. The 50th Battalion was formed, named for the military battalion that provided the organization support here. So definitely tells you a different time here. And then in 1924, the 50th won the Alberta title, but was down by Winnipeg in the Western Final here. And then in 1928, football in Calgary took a 4-year hiatus until the Tigers resurfaced in 1928 here and made history that year, being with the first forward fast in Canadian football here. So that's where I mentioned that rugby eventually evolved into football today here. As I know with rugby here, you pass laterally going behind here, and I know that unless you're behind the line of scrimmage in football here, that's the only time you can do a forward pass here. So interesting that they brought that up. And then in 1931, the Calgary Tigers became a 4-year existence, playing at the 2,000-seat Moana Stadium, which actually that's the old stadium near the Armory on the west end of downtown in Calgary there, where actually that's where the Calgary Stampeders played their football in the early days before the current day McMahon Stadium here. 1935, the Altomahs gave way to the Bronx in 1935 here and became part of the Western Interprofessional Football Union. And then, later I'll talk about the Bronx more in depth in another episode here. But in 1938, the Bronx took the league championship in 1938. And then in 1940, senior football in Calgary ended in 1940 when World War II began. And then after that, 1945, that's when the current day Calgary Stampeders was formed. And this year, so when we have football in 2020 here, this would be celebrating their 75th anniversary season. However, I think we're going to have to push that off till next year the way things are going right now, but that's some history here. And then I found this fandom site where it talks about the more championships here. So it lists more of the championships here, the years that we had rugby in Alberta here. And then I found this website here where I couldn't find any logos or jerseys on the football team here, but there's the local history girl, which when I was doing some Google search, I'll put all the links in the description here, but I'll share these pictures on the video here. It showed some pictures of the Calgary Tigers playing here, and it looks like some of these pictures, they mentioned that where they played these games was in Riley Park, which is, south of, just south of the state there. And I know that's where there's a pool and a cricket field there. That apparently that's where the Tigers played in the early days here, so I'll share those pictures, and there's the link in the description here. So I'll put acknowledge that. And then I found this Calgary Canucks Rugby Club here. And another website here, it was formed in 1914 but disbanded in 1915 because most of the team enlisted to fight in the war here. And then it was reorganized for 1919, part of the Alberta Rugby Union, which also included the Calgary Tigers, the Edmonton Eskimos, and the University of Alberta there. So definitely some interesting tidbits here, but that's what I first learned about. Oh, there was a Calgary Canucks rugby team, but that's all I can find for the rugby team here, is that we definitely know that it traces the history back to eventually lead up into the Calgary Stampeders today here. So that's all I could find, just doing research at home here without going far and wide here. But, I find that when you're looking back some history over 100 years ago, a different time here, that's going to be hit or miss here. But what do you think of the Calgary Tigers, that was the hockey team, and the rugby/football team here? And I'm going to say it's definitely unique that both of the teams, major teams at the time there, kind of shared the same name, where you had the connections to the Stanley Cup and Grey Cup here. And I'm going to say there was connections to eventually, the Flames and the Stampeders here. So that's all I have for Remember the Calgary Series episode 5, talking about the Calgary Tigers here. I guess I can't really ask what's your favorite memory or relic here, because I'm going to assume that most people watching this won't remember the Calgary Tigers here, because much of this history would predate, your grandparents, or you have to somehow find your great-grandparents, or maybe they have any relics. But what do you think of everything here? And I have all the links to share all the relics here, but I'm just aware of its existence here, and it definitely was fun to try to research and try to pump up more things, and that's where I definitely learned about the Calgary Canucks here and the rugby team. I know the only Calgary Canucks that we have right now that's playing in the Alberta Junior Hockey League, which is the Junior Hockey League that's a level below the Western Hockey League with the Calgary Hip in there, but that Calgary Canucks is playing hockey, and there's definitely no connection between those teams here. But so yeah, if you enjoy everything I do in my Remember the Calgary series here, and of course, all my inspiration came from the Corral series, that Chris Wilson story, and See a Dead Clothing here. So anyway, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey, home of the Flames, Hip, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, and formerly home of the Calgary Tigers here. I mostly talk Calgary sports here, and this has just definitely been a fun project to continue on and make videos on and make an episode when I can here. I also do personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and I also do share my experiences on the road as a sport event here. So if it all sounds like you'd be interested to watch, to follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey. You know what you need to do, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I also have my other social media links down in the description below there, where I know I definitely use Instagram and Twitter. Especially if I'm about to do one of these videos here, I can share the logo and give my quick spiel on it here, which what I plan to do here for these episodes here. And now for speaking of the next episode here, for episode number 6 here, I think this is going to be a quicker double feature episode here, as we'll talk about the Calgary Drillers and Crush here, as there were 2 more basketball teams that Calgary had in the American Basketball Association, which is a different American Basketball Association, not the one that competed with the NBA there in the 60s and 70s here. It's a totally different identity here, but both of those teams definitely had a brief history here that I'll mention about, and that's all I have for the Calgary Tigers here. I'll find some relics that I've shared throughout the video here, but I'm going to say they definitely had a great history, where looking back at, a lot of players participated in the war here, and definitely got some players in the Hockey Hall of Fame as well here. But it's definitely very interesting to see how sports was like 100 years ago, where it's evolved to what it is now, and definitely got to wonder what sports fans were like back 100 years ago. But got to throw in another Back to the Future reference here, but we all don't have a DeLorean that we can just hop into and go back in time and find out here. So as I say here, I'll see you in the next video or next episode, which what I have been doing here is I made my introduction video where I talked about all the teams I plan to talk about here. Well, in that description, I'll put the links to the videos as I make them here, and also, it's all in this playlist here. So I'll see you then.